I want to thank you for coming to Theology Matters. This is a series of conversations that offer a valuable resource from Creighton University, getting theologians out of the tower and into the community. They are sponsored by the Amelia and Emo Graff Professor of Catholic Theology Chair at Creighton University, and are hosted here at St. Pius X, either by the Spectrum Group or by the Catholic Social Teaching. And tonight it's Spectrum, so welcome on behalf of Spectrum. In case you're new to our parish center, restrooms are just outside and to the right. Help yourself to refreshments, I've already said that. And, excuse me, yes, I'm not pointing at the right thing. There. I have a list back there on gold paper or white. If you want to be notified about future events, there, thank you, Vanna. If you want to be notified about future events, sign up with your email and I'll make sure that you get an invitation. At the end of tonight's presentation, we invite questions. Tonight we're going to be doing it a little bit differently. Every table has some papers on it. We're going to ask you to write your questions down and then hold them up in the air, and a runner will pick them up so that we can make sure everybody gets a chance to ask their questions. Everybody gets a chance to hear the question because it will be said into the microphone, and so I'll remind you of that later. Our speaker tonight is our very own Father Mike Eckley, excuse me. He's been our pastor here at St. Pius X for 6 years. He's been a priest in the Archdiocese for 26 years, 20 of which has been as a pastor. So what he's speaking to you tonight about is as a pastor and as a pastoral minister. So please join me in welcoming Father Mike Eckley.
Good evening and welcome everyone. I want to say thank you for coming out tonight and being here. And to echo what Colleen said, I want to thank Creighton University, Dr. Todd Salzman also for sponsoring this work in partnership. It's sponsored by Creighton University and hosted here at St. Pius. We're very honored to be able to host these events here at St. Pius. Obviously, as Colleen was saying, this whole idea is to get theologians out of the ivory tower and out to the parishes. I am not a theologian. I am a pastor and a practitioner. And I come to this from that perspective. As mentioned, I've been a priest for 26 years. On my 27th year as a priest, on my 21st year as a pastor. But working with couples from the very beginning, coming in, preparing marriage preparation, through the celebration of their marriage, being a support during their time of marriage, and then also ministering and working with individuals when marriages have broken up and there's that hurt and the healing and pain that is there. And so I come to it very much as a practitioner of pastoral ministry. And I think it's good because this document of the Holy Father on love in the family, he addresses to the bishop, priests, deacons, consecrated, Christian married couples, and all the lay faithful. But it seems to be written as a document for those who are working with couples, for couples themselves as a reflection, for the whole church as a reflection, but especially in particular parts that we're going to look at tonight, and to go a little bit more in depth. It is for them to reflect on the work that they're doing individually and what the church is doing, both the universal church and the local church, to help to support and to encourage couples who have entered into the sacrament of marriage. But as we begin, I want to begin with prayer. And one of the most familiar scripture readings that are done at a wedding is that from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interest. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injuries. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. If there are prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing. For we know partially, and we prophesy partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I used to talk as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. At present, we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face. At present, I know partially. Then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. So faith, hope, and love remain, these three. The greatest of these is love. I invite you to join me in this prayer. It was a prayer of one of the synods in preparation for the synod on the family. So I invite you to pray with me. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, in you we contemplate the splendor of true love. To you we turn with trust, Holy Family of Nazareth. Grant that our families too may be places of communion and prayer, authentic schools of the gospel, and small domestic churches. Holy Family of Nazareth, may families never again experience violence, rejection, and division. May all who have been hurt or scandalized find ready comfort and healing. Holy Family of Nazareth, make us once more mindful of the sacredness and inviolability of the family and its beauty in God's plan. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, graciously hear our prayer. Amen. Why? This question is, why me doing this? And what is my interest here? As I said, I come to it as a pastor, and dealing with families, dealing with couples, engagement all the way through is a large part of the work that I do as a pastor. But even before that, looking in particular some of the challenges of marriage, some of the challenges, especially when it comes to divorce and remarriage, and that remarriage taking place outside the church, was something that when I was in the seminary, I was looking at, wrestling with pastorally and theologically. When I was working on my Master of Divinity, I decided to take this as my topic. And what prompted me to do that was that there was a number of people in my own family, like I'm sure in each and every one of our families, or in our circle of friends, we know people who are dealing with these difficult situations. That divorce has happened, or remarriage, and the marriage is outside the church and struggling with the reality of that, their relationship with the church and questioning that and wrestling with that and their place, and sometimes feeling rejected, feeling on the outside, or feeling like second-class citizens within the church. And so I saw that in my own family and lived out in a number of different ways. I had a great aunt who was married, and her husband died pretty young. And she remarried. The person that she remarried was someone who had been married once before. He was not Catholic. And he had been married right during World War II and had lived with his first wife for about a month. And then they separated. And then he was deployed to Europe. And it took years actually to get the divorce. They only lived together as husband and wife for 1 month. But because they kind of lost track of each other, it was very difficult to make that connection. Years later, he met my great aunt, they got married. And because of his previous bond, they weren't able to get married in the church. And it was very difficult for him as a non-Catholic to understand why the Catholic Church had a concern about his wedding, or his first marriage. Also the problem of even knowing if his first wife was even alive or dead, because there had been no contact over years, and being able to contact her. And so for years, my great aunt would go to Mass regularly, but she would never go to communion. It was her way of doing that. She always was there, faithful to the church, faithful to, when her husband died, as I said, young, her youngest son was still in school, and being very supportive there of his Catholic education and volunteering and doing all those things, but just never went to communion. Her husband, my great uncle, I did his funeral a couple years after I was ordained. And very shortly after that, she called me, wanted to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation, and then immediately went to Mass and went to communion. But those many years being away from the sacrament, I know was something painful for her and difficult to deal with. I had a couple other relatives that dealt with it in different ways. I had one aunt that she was never married someone who'd been married before. It was a wedding or a marriage that only lasted 6 months. Kind of a similar situation, except war wasn't a part of it. They didn't know who it was. They did work on the annulment. But they were a young family struggling, and they got the annulment and they got the bill. And my aunt said, "I'm not paying it." She said, "The church has already said it's annulled. I'm annulled. I'm going to communion." It was her way of dealing with it. Now, to talk to them pastorally, as they said, you know, a prophet bound in his own home place. It's a little hard for me as a nephew to talk to my aunts, my great aunts, about things like this. Another aunt, a similar sort of situation, which she and her second husband had been both married before, never pursued an annulment for either one of them. And she just decided on her own that she was going to go to communion. Had the kids, she lives in a different state, moved away, no one knew where she was from or her story, except the story she told. And so that became her reality. But I knew that each one of them had wrestled with that. I've also had other family members, friends, and when I was at St. Paul Seminary, we were put into a parish our first year. And we went to that parish and worked in that parish in different ways over the 4 years in the seminary. And so in my third year was helping with marriage prep, and then also sat in on a few discussions with the pastor as people came in to start working on an annulment. So pursuing this and looking at particularly at that question about communion to those who are divorced and remarried outside the church. And there wasn't a whole lot of options. And it's not like there's a whole, like the floodgates open up with the Holy Father's document. But there is a different way of thinking of it. I was reading an article earlier today. I was reading a whole bunch of articles, but one of the articles I read, the Secretariat in Rome was talking about that this has been a paradigm shift in the church. And there's a lot of people wrestling with this document. And I think that's exactly what the Holy Father wanted us to do as faithful people and as pastors, bishops, the church overall, to wrestle with this. And the document itself, he says there's no easy solutions, no easy answers. And he's not going to offer those necessarily. But he does offer some ways to think about it and how. Just a brief history. On October 8, 2013, Pope Francis announced that in October 2014, there would be an extraordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops on topics related to the family and evangelization. And then on October 5th to the 19th, that extraordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops is held in Vatican City. It's only the third in 50 years of an extraordinary General Assembly. And a General Assembly, an extraordinary General Assembly, is usually called to deal with a particular issue that needs resolution and a critical issue. And as the Holy Father looked at it, as we look at the situation of families around the world, it's an extraordinary situation. the struggling of many families, struggling of many individuals. And so he called this third only in 50 years of the Extraordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops. And then after that, a year later, the Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops on the family, the second one. One of the things that was very unique, and I don't know if anyone here took the opportunity to do so, but there was an invitation for input before the Synod. And because of technology today, being able to get that message out, being able to hit a lot more people, to be able to go online, to look at the survey, fill out things, there was input that came in from all over the world. Not just from bishops and not just from theologians, but from priests in the parishes and deacons and laymen and women. And that was encouraged to get that input as these synods were meeting and these discussions were being held. And then on April 8, 2016, Pope Francis issued this exhortation, The Joy of Love. I would say the Latin, but I haven't had Latin since high school, and it always gets caught in my tongue, so I always like to use the English for that. One of the things that the Holy Father says in the document itself, and which is important to call to mind, is that this was issued during the Year of Mercy. And the Holy Father, in a couple places throughout, talks about this being done in the Year of Mercy. And mercy being what we need to approach the situation and approach our brothers and sisters, especially our brothers and sisters that are hurting, that we approach them with mercy. In paragraph 7, he says, given the rich fruits of the 2-year synod process, the exhortation will treat in different ways a wide variety of questions. This explains its inevitable length. Consequently, I do not recommend a rushed reading of the text. How many people have read the text? I got a few. And I invite you, sometimes papal documents can be pretty dry. I found this, Pope Francis, his writing to be very engaging, at times poetic in his writing. Very, very much engaged with the person who's reading it and thought-provoking, but as he says, it's not something to be rushed through, it's something to be savored. And he says married couples especially may want to look at chapters 4 and 5, which is Love in Marriage and Love Made Fruitful. Those are the titles of those 2 chapters. Pastoral Ministers, chapter 6, some pastoral perspectives. And then Everyone Challenged by chapter 8, Accompanying, Discerning, and Integrating Weakness. And of all the chapters where the discussion and the debate and the angst tends to lie is in chapter 8. I think most people reading chapters 1 through 7 and chapter 9 would look at those and agree 100% of what's being laid out. And the beauty of married life, the fruitfulness of it, the gift of it. But it is chapter 8 that we have much of the discussion and much of the challenge. In some pastoral perspectives in that chapter, in chapter 6, the one that he recommends pastoral ministers to look at, one of the things that he encouraged or wrote, the Synod Fathers also highlighted the fact that evangelization needs unambiguously to denounce cultural, social, political, and economic factors such as the excessive importance given to market logic that prevent authentic family life and lead to discrimination, poverty, exclusion, and violence. There was a call especially to the lay faithful, to lay Christians, who are involved in politics, who are involved in social policy, to work towards policies that will strengthen families, that will enable families to truly experience the joy of family life. So many of our families don't really experience family life, in that both couples, those that are together, working both full-time jobs, and sometimes 2 jobs, and especially the working poor, not able to meet basic needs without having a couple jobs. The difficulty the strain that puts on families. The Holy Father brings out a number of different things that are challenges to families. But in those things that are part of our culture, part of our social policies, economic, social, and cultural, we need to work to change. We need to work to make policies that are going to strengthen families and to be a support for them. He talks about the parish as being the family of families. And it is in the parish where family life is lived, experienced for the most part, and the parish is to be a place of support, a place of encouragement for families. And in many different ways, helping to educate the youth, offering opportunities for the adults for continued faith formation and spiritual growth, to be that place they come together to celebrate faith, and especially with the Eucharist, the Sacrament of Reconciliation, that the parish is so important as part of family and part of family life. I remember when I was in Battle Creek as pastor, one of the guys who was very involved in the parish, he was on the pastoral council. He was always up there whenever it snowed with the snow blower to help me to clear out the driveway, clear out the walks. He'd always talk about when he was growing up, he said it was church, school, home. That's his whole life revolved around that. They weren't at church or at school and extracurricular activities, then you're home. And that was the basis of life. And I imagine many people can say that, older people can say that was life. You were either at home, you're at school, or you're at church. I growing up 2 blocks from Our Lady of Lourdes, spent a lot of time there. A lot of volunteer time besides going to school there, besides the sacramental sort of things. It was part of life, and a lot of the social activities came out of the parish also. Talks about the importance of seminary formation and development of lay leaders, especially working with those who are engaged and those who are married. And talking about the formation of seminarians. Here in Omaha, we're very fortunate to have the Institute of Priestly Formation. We have seminarians that come from all over the country, all over the world, really, for spiritual formation and development. And that's one aspect, an important aspect of preparation for priesthood. Academic formation. Many of the seminaries provide some good academic, good solid foundation. I think I had a very good pastoral experience. As I said, my experience in the seminary, we were assigned to a parish in our first year, and we were with that parish for the 4 years. And so not only was I taking classes, but I was going to the parish and seeing how parish life was lived. I thought it was a great preparation for me to come into parish and pastoral ministry. It's also important for that human formation, because seminarians are coming from the families, and some of them have been very good experiences in family, some coming from broken families and hurting families, and for those individuals to be able to deal with whatever hurts, whatever is missing in that, it's so important to have that healed as they're going to be working with families and being part of their life. And so the Holy Father talks about the importance of formation, but especially that human formation. Then he talks about preparing engaged couples. And to continue to look at it, he's talked in the document and other things that he's talked about since then is about a catechumenate for the engaged. If you're familiar with the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults, we talk about the catechumenate, that journey. And many parishes right now are getting ready for Lent, getting ready for the rite of sending and the rite of enrollment. So those who are going to be baptized will become the elect, and the candidates preparing for this last piece of preparation. Many of them have begun back in in the fall of this journey with sponsors, with other people from the parish, walking with them, being an example and model of Christian life. And their formation hopefully has been a spiritual formation. It has been a catechetical formation, learning about the faith, having their questions answered about the church, growing in their love for Christ, in their love for the church, and anticipation and looking forward to the sacraments. But that catechumenate is a process with many people involved. And the Holy Father's talking about a catechumenate for the engaged. That they can walk with others who are preparing, walk with others who are already living marriage, and to be that example, be that model, so that they can come to an understanding of what it is that they're entering into, to continue to grow in that love for one another, to be strengthened in that. And as a diocese, there are certain things we do. When I was first ordained 26 years ago, our preparation, the length of preparation was universal law, which was 4 months. And still, that's the minimum universal law for preparation for marriage. Our diocese has extended it out to 6 months. Some dioceses have gone longer, to 9 months or a year of preparation for a couple to come in. And it doesn't seem that strange. I get people calling here wanting to get married a year from now. In Omaha, in a city, to book a church, to book a hall, to book a caterer, to book a photographer, to do all those things, sometimes it has to be a year out, at least, before that. But that's an opportunity, too, for the church to be able to invite them into that preparation. The Holy Father talks about a lot of emphasis on the day, but that whole preparation beforehand, that long period of preparation. And then the ongoing walking with couples, accompanying the first years of married life. My dad used to tell a story that when he and my mom got married, they were at my grandparents' house, my mom's parents' house, for the reception. They got married at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then they had a reception over at my grandparents' house. And my grandpa, my dad's dad, when my mom and dad were going to leave, they were going to take off for their honeymoon, walked up to him and said, he's reaching in his back pocket for his wallet. He said, "You got enough money for the honeymoon? Is everything okay?" And my dad said, "Yeah, I think I got enough." And he took out his hand and said, "Well, good luck, have a good life." And shook his hand. In some ways, I think we do a lot. We can do better with our preparation with engaged couples. But in many ways, we give them the blessing and we send them off. And there's not a whole lot in our parishes and in our dioceses right now to walk with couples. There have been different things over the years, marriage encounter, other things like along those lines, but more needs to be there to walk with couples, a variety of different things. But to provide that structure, that guidance for young couples. You know, years ago, and in some cultures still, you lived close to extended family. And so you had that support there. You had that witness of cousins who were about your same age who were entering into marriage. And you had the example of aunts and uncles and grandparents that you could turn to for advice and when you're struggling with things. In understanding marriage, because you're seeing it and seeing it at different levels and walking with them, and it was kind of that natural sort of relationship. But now we have to be more intentional in that, in forming those kinds of communities, or those kinds of groups. Walking with and accompanying those people who were married, especially in those first years, I think is very important, very critical. I had the opportunity to have dinner. I'm going to call you out, Kathy. Kathy Martin's back there. Kathy's a parishioner here. Her and her husband, John, have been part of a group for a number of years of some couples that they get together on a monthly basis to talk about their marriage, to talk about with each other, the things that are going good, the things that aren't going so good. They read something along the lines of marriage and the theology of marriage, or something with the spirituality of it, and share that together, and share that discussion, share a meal together. And we were talking, and the reason why I had dinner with them the other night is talking about starting something here at St. Pius along those lines, to offer to couples at all stages of marriage, that invitation to come together and to form groups like that, to be that mutual support for one another. And then accompany the divorced. As the Holy Father says, it's important that the divorced who have entered a new union should be made to feel part of the church. They are not excommunicated, and they should not be treated as such, since they remain part of the ecclesial community. So important. One of the things the Holy Father talks about, the importance of accompanying people, one, because of the children and the brokenness that is there, and that they're experiencing. I know from my own personal experience how devastating that can be. Fortunately, I come from a family that my mom and dad were married until my dad died. They were married 44 years. But there was about a year separation that took place when I was 8 years old. And that was a very confusing and difficult time. I was the oldest of 5 children at the time. I was 8 years old. And I remember very clearly that day. We lived in Fremont. I went to St. Pat's grade school. It was right before Thanksgiving break. Got off the bus, went into the front door, and I'm in 3rd grade. My sister Patty's in 2nd grade. My brother Joe's in 1st grade. The 3 of us walk into the house. And the associate pastor from our parish is there, who was a good friend of my mom and dad's. My mom's brothers. And boxes. She said, "Go put your clothes and some toys in here, we're leaving." And that evening, we're at my grandmother's house in Omaha. After the weekend, after Thanksgiving weekend, started school at Our Lady of Lourdes. It was difficult, confusing. And fortunately, there was a lot of people there, family. I remember going to Catholic Charities counselors at 42nd and Center Street, their counseling office there as a kid, talking about what was going on. The support of the school and the teachers there. But that community helped to accompany and walk with us. And it's a very important people, and eventually my dad got the help that he needed. The biggest issue was alcoholism. My dad being an active alcoholic. My mom said she got the best advice from Father Schwartley. Father Schwartley told her, "Leave him now while you still love him. Because then there will be an opportunity for healing. Because if you wait to the point where there's just so much anger, so much hurt, and so much hate, you'll be less likely to be able to heal. So leave him now." And my mom did that, as difficult as it was with 5 little kids, no job, moving in with her mother. The one thing, my mom still had 2 younger sisters. My grandpa died a few years before that, very young. He was 54 years old when he died. I had 2 aunts that were still, one just graduated from high school, one was still in high school. With 5 nieces and nephews moving in, the one who was out of high school found an apartment really quick. Got out of the house. But it was a challenging situation, but to have that accompaniment and to find ways that we can do that. So often, people are struggling financially. And how can we reach out and be a help and a support? And unfortunately, because we have, in our culture, people tend to be more private and not talk about those sorts of things, not want to burden other people, not have people know what's going on. They don't say a whole lot. When I was pastor in Hooper and Scribner, small town especially, but this is in any parish community, I think, but I think it's even highlighted more in small towns. No one came to confession. No one would go to confession. When I have a penance service, they'd come and they'd go to all the other priests. But no one came to confession. And one Sunday I got up and I said, I was an associate pastor in West Point, which is the next town to the west. And I was the associate pastor in Fremont, which was the next town to the east and to the south. I said, you've already gone to confession to me because you've gone to those towns to go to confession. I said, you can come here. But there's that privacy, and we want to hide things, but find ways where can be that invitation and to accompany people who are struggling and who are having that difficulty. It is so important. And for the children, for the individuals, for all those that are hurting, to walk with them. Accompanying, discerning, and integrating weakness. This is looking at chapter 8 and what the Holy Father has to say with those in irregular situations and what needs to be done and what we can do. And really where the paradigm shift that he spoke about or was spoken about is what's going on right now in the church is wrestling with it. And if you've seen any articles there, the German bishops in Buenos Aires and bishops in Malta have issued things to their priest and in their diocese for opening up communion. And then there's bishops from other countries and from our own country who are writing saying we need a stronger definition of what all this means. But the Holy Father in his writing says the Synod stated that although the Church realizes that any breach of the marriage bond is against the will of God, she is also conscious of the frailty of many of her children. Anyone here perfect? Oh, one. We got one. We always have to have one. None of us are perfect. All of us have brokenness in different levels of brokenness in our lives. And with sin. And within our imperfections. And the Lord never crushed those. One of my favorite readings about mercy, and it doesn't say mercy exactly, from Isaiah. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not extinguish. His desire is to take that smolder and to fan it to a flame. Take the brokenness and bring healing into it. And the church isn't about just the 99 sheep, it's about the one who's straying, or the one who's hurting. So many of Jesus' miracles are healing miracles. Restoring that wholeness. Those that are hurting, those that are broken. It says there are two ways of thinking which reaccrue throughout the church's history: casting off and reinstating. The church's way from the time of the Council of Jerusalem has always been the way of Jesus, the way of mercy and reinstatement. The way of the church is not to condemn anyone forever. It is to pour out the balm of God's mercy on all those who ask for it with a sincere heart. For true charity is always unmerited, unconditional, and gratuitous. We don't earn God's mercy. We don't earn grace. We open ourselves up to it. And by God's grace, we're able to open ourselves up to it by His free gift and His ongoing gift. We're healed. We're made whole by Him. We're forgiven. Not because of what we do, but because He loves us. And we're not to cast off. When I was studying the seminary in canon law, our canon law professor always said, you never tell anyone no completely. It may be no, not now. Or we got to wait, we got to do this. But no one's cast off completely. And we need to find ways to walk with people who are hurting, to be examples of that balm. goes on, their participation can be expressed in different ecclesial services, which necessarily requires discerning which of the various forms of exclusion currently practiced in the liturgical, pastoral, educational, and institutional framework can be surmounted. He speaks of each of those: liturgical, pastoral, educational, and institutional. A lot of times, like my great aunt, come to church, volunteered, was involved in a couple different committees in her parish, and gave of her time, gave of her gifts. But it's not just those kind of pastoral, but these are liturgical barriers that we can overcome in certain situations, in certain circumstances. The Holy Father seems to say yes. Forms of exclusion currently practiced can be surmounted. It is true that general rules set forth a good which can never be disregarded or neglected, but in their formulation they cannot provide absolutely for all particular situations. At the same time, it must be said that precisely for that reason, what is part of a particular discernment in particular circumstances cannot be elevated to the level of a rule. He's talking about people with their conscience. And earlier, he says, we are called as a church to form people's consciences, not to replace them. And that we have to honor the person, walk with them, and strongly recommend it for pastoral ministers, for pastors, for others who are trained to do so, to walk with people who are in this process of discernment of where they are perhaps in an irregular relationship and where they are in relationship to the church, and to respect that conscience and to respect that process that they're going through. If a person, like one of my aunts, who just decided without the law to go to communion, that's not the rule. That's not the ideal. And it doesn't diminish the ideal. And it doesn't diminish the rule. One of the objections that was reading in some of the articles from some of the bishops in different bishop conferences are saying, well, if you do this, the floodgate's going to open up and everyone's just going to come to communion and not even think about it. Well, they might do that. You're right. Some may. But my experience of those who are coming and hurting, they're looking for answers. They're looking to want to be connected and part of the church. They're serious about it. People come to start an annulment process because they're looking to get married again. There's a desire to be connected to the church, a desire to celebrate this marriage in the church, wanting to be connected for themselves, for their relationship. There are people that are very serious about this. And this is serious discernment, and when that happens, we have to respect that. But we don't say that if someone makes a decision that's contrary to the law, that becomes the rule. The rule is still there. But there's also that discernment and conscience that needs to be respected. Because of forms of conditioning and mitigating factors, it's possible that an objective situation of sin, which may not be subjectively culpable or fully such, a person can be living in God's grace, can love, and can also grow in the life of grace and charity while receiving the church's help to this end. You know, my great aunt, the marriage that she had was not a sacrament. But they were married for over 40 years. They were a witness to each other in love, fidelity, commitment. He helped to raise her youngest son, had a good relationship with her other son and daughter. He was a grandfather to their children. To anyone looking from the outside would say that's a solid marriage. That's what marriage is meant to be. objectively looking at it, you say that it was sin. But subjectively culpable of sin? To say that God's grace wasn't alive there, and that love wasn't growing, and it wasn't a model? As the Holy Father speaks in the document, he talks about the married couple being an icon of God. God's love. A love that's fruitful and life-giving. Love that is faithful. It's a model of Christ in his marriage to the church. Those symbols we talk about in the sacrament of marriage and what they are to be. And in the fruitfulness of it, when it's there, it's such a powerful example. And to say that some people who are living in an irregular relationship aren't modeling that, it does a disservice to the reality of their lives. There's a note to paragraph 305, it's note 351. In certain cases, this can include the help of the sacraments. Hence, I want to remind priests that confessional is not a torture chamber, but rather an encounter with the Lord's mercy. I would also point out that the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak. Or one of my professors in the seminary asking the question, is the Eucharist the food that nourishes us, the food that draws us together and makes us united, heals us? Or is it the dessert that we get when we've been good? Another way of saying that, Holy Father says it a lot better. I think it's not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the sick. He goes on to say, and understands those parts. I understand those who prefer more rigorous pastoral care, which leaves no room for confusion. There are cardinals and bishops that keep writing him and say there's confusion. Would you please clarify this? He does not respond to them. He understands there's going to be confusion. He understands, he wants us to wrestle with this. It's not easy questions. It's not easy solutions. But I sincerely believe that Jesus wants a church attentive to the goodness which the Holy Spirit sows in the midst of human weaknesses. A mother who, while clearly expressing her objective teaching, always does what good she can, even in the process her shoes get soiled by the mud of the street. That's what I mean about some of this poetic sort of writing of the Holy Father, putting this together. I love the images that he uses here. It'd be great if we all lived the ideal. But we know in the brokenness that's not a reality. Is that my last slide? Oh, I'm done. No. When it comes to this, it's not something that the Holy Father is saying, yes, those who are in irregular marriages, you're welcome to come to communion. Or yes, diocese, make that a policy. What he's saying is, let us walk with each other. Those that are hurting, those that are wrestling with this question in their life. To walk with the pastors of the church, spiritual director. Wrestle with those questions. Where are you? Look, and the Holy Father talks about looking seriously at how you behaved, perhaps in that first marriage. And what led to the breakup. How were you to your children during that time and during the breakup? To your spouse? Who needs to be healed? Where are you at right now? What is this relationship that you're in? How is it a model? Is it? Is there grace? Is it a model of God's love? And as we wrestle with those questions, wrestle with the reality of those, honest with ourselves, and that's to have a good spiritual director, to have someone to walk with us. We always need that. I need that. I can rationalize about anything. When I was in the seminary, I was in charge of the Community Life Committee, and we were having a celebration. It was 1 year after we moved into a brand new building. And I had ordered a whole bunch of Godfather's pizzas. There were supposed to be like 70 people there. So according to how much I eat, I ordered half a pizza for everyone. I was also a lot bigger at that time. Not as many guys showed up. We had all these pizzas left over. The person on the staff who was in charge was very upset with me and was talking to me. I was explaining to this person why I ordered so many pizzas. My parents happened to be there, and my dad was standing right next to me. He said, "Mike, I've always admired this about you. You could take any situation and rationalize it and make it sound somewhat reasonable. We need good people in our lives to call us to task in our discernment. But we also need to be respectful. And the Holy Father says that also in here, about being respectful of the person's conscience and those conclusions. And the conclusions don't dismiss the Church's teaching, the beauty and the ideal, or the rule. But the rule, which is a gift, doesn't always fit. Doesn't fit the reality of our lives at times. So I want to wrap up there, but open it up for questions.
If you have questions, hold them up. Will a person who has married out of the church go to hell? My sister loves God and lived her life helping in her church. I don't believe she's in hell. That's an easy one.
As the church teaches, the only ones we can say definitively are in heaven, the church says definitively are in heaven, is the canonized saints of the church. We know that there's a heaven and a hell. The church has not said that. The judgment is up to God. But I truly believe that a person's heart, their relationship with the Lord, this one thing that maybe prevented them, and the relationship that they had, the fruitfulness of that, the grace, the openness to grace, there is that possibility. Not of going to hell, but of heaven. There's a possibility we can go to hell.
Both my husband and I sought annulments of previous marriages. I was granted an annulment, but he was not. Is there any recourse, a request to look at this again? And does a pastor have the ability to bless the marriage anyway? So that's two questions.
Right. With the marriage, the annulment that was not granted, unless that spouse has died, the freedom is not there. And so as a priest would not have the jurisdiction or the ability or canonically to be able to bless that marriage and to witness the exchange of vows. There are different recourses that can be done. And one of the things that's important too is I think those in second relationships to look at those remedies and the legal remedies within the church and within canon law first and foremost, and to pursue those. There's always possibility if there's been some new evidence or new witnesses that could be brought forward to testify to circumstances in the relationship with the first marriage, to reintroduce that case. I know in the past, I haven't done it for a while, but the case can be introduced into the diocese in which you're married, in which you're living, which perhaps your former spouse is living. Those would all have jurisdiction to look at the marriage. So if it was not granted, and perhaps to look at another diocese or another tribunal would be another option.
There's also different causes. You look at one cause in the first one, or the wife.
Right, and if there's some other evidence that came forward or some other testimony that could be put forward to that.
How much does an annulment cost?
Zero now. Back then it was $600, I believe. One of the things the Holy Father has asked is that the expense be eliminated or reduced quite a bit. And encouraging dioceses to have tribunals that work quickly, that are well-staffed, to be able to address the number of annulments that come in so that they can be done in a reasonable amount of time. There are certain cases also that the Holy Father said the local bishop can decide, too. Those are unique sorts of situations outside of a formal case. But the diocese, our diocese has eliminated the fee. Now, that was since the year of mercy.
Okay. Jesus said at the Last Supper when distributing the bread, he said it was for all. How can the church restrict access to the Eucharist? And the all is asterisked, and he knew that he would be betrayed by Judas sitting there. So how can the church restrict access to the Eucharist?
The church, as the body of Christ here on the earth, in the institutional church, the church was Christ established. Christ had it on responsibility, and responsibility also to protect the faith and to hand it on from generation to generation. And so there is a responsibility there that, to make sure that those who celebrate the sacraments are properly formed and prepared to do that, and prepared for the education. I can't get my own elements for the Eucharist. I can't say, well, today I'm going to use crackers that have this in it, and we'll use we'll use Kool-Aid instead of wine, or use beer. There is something that the church has a responsibility to protect the integrity of the sacrament. Now, and that's the question that the church is wrestling with in the Holy Father is there certain circumstances that people have said you're not allowed to go, or not allowed towards the sacrament, but after discernment and after looking at it, the possibility of being able to do that. Although the church would not say that the laws changed, the rule would change, the Holy Father would not say that. But the person's own personal discernment towards that. I think approaching the Eucharist and approaching receiving the body and blood of Christ is a gift. And it's a gift that's given through the church by the Lord. We didn't earn it. We don't deserve it. But as we come forward, we recognize that it is a gift, but it does call something from us. And a response of faith, and a response of striving to live faithfully as best we can. And the Holy Father speaks of that, of living that kind of faithful life. But there are some things that are there. I always, as a minister, I was always taught, if someone presents himself for the sacrament, you always assume their best intention. So when a couple comes to me to begin marriage prep, I always assume that they want to enter into a sacramental marriage. If someone comes to me in the confessional, I assume that they want to be forgiven. If someone comes to me for the Eucharist, I assume their good intention and their faith and their belief. If something proves different later, then that discussion has to be held, but I think we always start with that assumption of good faith. I don't know if I danced around that or if I answered that.
I've got some clear ones here.
Okay.
This sounds like relativism. What specifically is the case where a person outside the church's teaching can receive the Eucharist?
I think very simply, what the Holy Father says is it's not a new rule, it's not a new law. And he wasn't going to put parameters or a law down, but he does talk about conscience, and he talks about the development of conscience, and he talks about the person coming to that decision of conscience and making that decision.
And you talked about the primacy of conscience at a prior Theology Matters. Those would be okay. Accompanying, discerning, and integrating weakness is a theme of the Pope in Amoris. It is easy to think about these three actions as stepping stone paths out of a situation. Pastorally, how do you see these three steps as actively interacting even over time?
Well, we meet people where they're at, and we start off with that accompaniment, developing that relationship, and that accompaniment assumes a relationship, assumes that a relationship is developing and has been developed. That sharing stories and listening to the pain that's there, listening to the joy that's there, listening and walking with that person. And then that discerning is that prayerful, that work of prayer, and listening to the Spirit, and also having someone walking with you and accompanying you and discerning with you through prayer is important. Give you an example. Early in my priesthood, there was a period of time that I was really wrestling with the question of whether to continue as a priest. A lot of times, many of us rethink and look at the commitments we made. Are we going to recommit to it or go forward? And that's what I eventually did. But I had a very good spiritual director at the time, Father Tom Ward. And I remember sitting there and talking about this with him and saying that I really think that, I should try something else. Sell cards with my brother, so do something else. And he was saying, no, you should be a priest. And he said, at one point he said, I know what the problem here is. You know what you want to do, and I know what I want you to do. But neither one of us has asked God what you should do. And so that discernment is doing that hard work of prayer, bringing those questions to prayer, wrestling with those questions in prayer with the Spirit, and with that person accompanying you, praying for you, with you, about the situation, and discussing it, and like I said before, that person that can say, that doesn't sound like the Spirit. That sounds like your will, making more of its place in there. And doing that hard work of discernment. And then that integration is finding where can that person integrate. And saying, when the person comes to that decision of conscience, the Holy Father says that in his exhortation, is that they decide that they shouldn't receive the Eucharist, that we have to respect that. And if they think that, or come to the discernment after this period of time, and that this is the way they're going to be involved in the church, but not in that way, or not at this time, or if they do that, if they say that they believe that they should receive the Eucharist, to respect that. And he says it doesn't diminish what the rule is, what the church is, what the virtue is. It respects the conscience and the journey and the discernment that took place. And so as a pastor, walking with people throughout that, getting to know them, getting to know their story, praying with them, praying for them, listening to them and their experience of prayer, and looking at that question. And then helping them to decide what ways can we integrate.
This is not written down, but does that extend to principals of Catholic schools who may have people on staff who are in irregular marriages? Can they respect the person's discernment that they are in a position to teach?
I think you have a more difficult situation, I think, there. Because it's different than a lay faithful saying, I've made this discernment to be in the sacrament. It's another thing for someone who's been put in a role of authority, or teaching authority, to say that. Because there's a representation, when you take a position within the church, you're taking a position of saying that you're willing to be a representative of the church and its teachings and its values. And to publicly not have that could be very difficult.
Scandal.
Yeah.
Like the case of your great aunt who married a non-Catholic who didn't get an annulment, couldn't she request or qualify for a favor of the faith rather than an annulment?
He was baptized,
Okay.
so the favor of the faith would be qualified in that. And I'm not sure, whether or not his first wife was baptized or not, because they really couldn't find her.
What?
What's that?
What is favor of faith?
The favor of the faith means that because one of the people in the first marriage was not baptized, that the marriage is dispensed in favor of the faith of the person to be able to marry someone who is baptized Catholic. And for instance, my sister-in-law was married once before. She was never baptized. Her first marriage was a very difficult situation, and the divorce, no children. Years later, she met my brother. My brother had never been married before. They wanted to get married in the church, but instead of an annulment, they went for the favor of the faith because she was not baptized. And so there's a question of the sacrament, whether it's a sacrament because of the lack of baptism by one or both people. Because the sacramental marriage has to be between baptized. And so the question is whether the baptism of the one enables that to be sacramental, or does the non-baptism of the one prohibit that? And because it's a kind of an open question, the Holy Father will make a decision in favor of the faith for that person to enter into another marriage, as long as they don't enter it. Like my sister-in-law could not enter into another one that was doubtful. She had to be baptized before she entered into the second marriage.
I thought maybe that had things to do, it just refers to marriage.
Right.
Okay. What did she say?
Just whether it applied to other things. It's a term for a particular kind of marriage case.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Why do different priests say different things about remarriage and divorce?
Why do different bishops and cardinals? I especially when it comes to this, it's a question that's a shift in sort of how we're looking at things, and an approach that's different. And like I said, there's a number of bishops that keep writing the Holy Father saying you got to clarify this because it's causing confusion. It reminds me a little bit of me going to my parents and saying, well, I'm going to ask again because maybe you'll change your mind. Say something different. And there's a great tradition in the church of pre-shopping, going around and finding one that's going to answer the question the way that you want it asked. I'm always careful about that, even going into our school here, because especially the junior high kids are pretty bragging. They'll ask a question to Father Craig, and they'll ask a question about me, and find out, who answers it and how we answer it, and that's not what Father Craig said. I just got to check to see what he had to say. But right now, with this particular question, I think people are wrestling with it and struggling with it, and what does this mean for the church? The question came about, it sounds like relativism. The Holy Father said, I know that this sounds, to some, they would want something more concrete and definitive. But he wasn't going to give that. He gave some parameters, and different groups are doing different things. The Bishop of Buenos Aires issued some guidelines. And they talked about how, communion to the divorced and remarried, after this period of discernment and looking at this, is possible. It wasn't saying that everyone enter into this, and it wasn't opening the doors, and it was saying it was rare, and with the discernment and truly looking at this. And they sent it to the Holy Father asking, are we on the right track? And the Holy Father said he actually had their document printed and put next to this. and saying, you were in the right mind of what this means. And so they're wrestling with it. Other bishops are not happy with that response. We're human beings. And then the church is filled with human beings. We all have our different opinions. And with this moral question, it's wrestling, but I think it's good, and I think that's what the Holy Father calls us to do, is to wrestle with it, to be in the midst of it. But first and foremost, as he said, this document was put out in the year of mercy. And always as we approach one another, and even if we disagree with each other, that charity towards each other and that mercy towards each other is so important.
So does that mean being respectful of others' conscience should diminish judgment?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That was easy. Okay. This is a situation. My stepdaughter married out of the church. She didn't want a divorce. Her husband left her. I believe she should be able to receive the Eucharist. That's all I have. So she married out of the church.
When someone gets divorced, they're still open to the sacramental life of the church completely. The problem comes in with remarriage, and that when that remarriage takes place outside of the church. The person who entered the marriage, if she was Catholic and baptized Catholic, by church law, she's required to get married according to the law of the church, and so the church would not recommend it as recognize it as sacramental. And so a civil marriage happened, a civil divorce happened. If she's been away from the church, I'd encourage her to go to the sacrament of reconciliation if she's been away for a while. But there's nothing preventing her from celebrating the sacraments, reconciliation, Eucharist. Or possibly a marriage down the road, we'd have to just apply for a defective form.
These are all the questions that I have. If someone else has one, write it down, wave it up here. Otherwise, I'm going to... This is a bit early, but that will allow me to put in a plug for my next theology. Oh, someone's writing a question. Okay.
While that question's being written and before Colleen comes up here, again, I want to say thank you. And I encourage those who have not read this to read it. You can get it free online. You don't have to print it out. It's 300 pages. So I would recommend, unless you got a lot of ink in your printer and a lot of paper in your printer tray. But you can read it online and to read it slowly. For those who are married, to read it together as a couple. There's some beautiful reflections on marriage in here and on love. And encourage you to do that. For those that may be in an irregular situation, I encourage you to pursue what can be done, either within the law, and most importantly, first to pursue that, not to dismiss that. That's important. But to continue to discern in your own situation where you are in life. And as the Holy Father says, you're not excommunicated. You're part of the ecclesial body of Christ. You're part of the church, and an important part of the church. And for those, many times you're in these situations, it's painful, hurting part of the church. That the church and its members and pastors want to be there, present, to bring healing, help, and hope.
Would you explain what a defective form is, please?
A defective form would be the form of the church is that the form of baptism is, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The form for sacrament of marriage, there's two set of vows that have to be spoken by the couple. And the couple speaking that to each other, witnessed by either a priest or deacon and two witnesses. If for a Catholic who's baptized Catholic, you're required to get married according to that. You use those vows unless a dispensation has been granted from that. and with a priest or deacon and 2 witnesses. If that is not, if the person got married in a civil marriage or got married in a Christian church but didn't have the dispensation to do that, they lack the proper form for a sacrament to be valid. And so if that marriage ends in divorce, they're looking to get a second marriage, then would have to do the paperwork of a defective form, which is just a marriage certificate, a divorce decree, a baptismal certificate of the person who's applying for that, just some paperwork that they have never formally left the church or joined another church, and then it's sent to the bishop, and usually about 2 weeks later I get it back. So that's a defective form. So the form was not followed.
And here is a radical question. Should the church even be in the marriage business? Why not just bless civil marriages, which is what you're just talking about?
Which the church did in the early years. And that's what they did. But with the development of the sacrament, the development of this understanding, we can't go back. We have to live the reality of the lived experience of the church, guided by the Holy Spirit, and this is where we're at. And if it is, as the Holy Father says, a new paradigm shift, then that's where we're at right now. I think with the sacrament, I think it's important. And as the Holy Father said, married couple, when this is lived fruitfully, not perfectly, because no couple lives it perfectly, but when it's lived fruitfully, it is such a model to the rest of the church, and a sign of hope for the rest of the church. And family, and the stability of the family, we know, is the stability of the church and the broader community. How important strong families are. And so I don't think we should disengage from the life of the family, and especially at the preparation of that and the beginning of that in the life of the family, and the couple that are married.
Any other questions? Yes?
Don. Father Don.
If I don't have a question, people will think I was sick or something.
I just thought you were asleep.
Well, I did doze off a couple times.
Well, I know.
I read quite a bit of a document today. I hadn't done it before. But as I was reading, I was thinking at the same time. And it's beautifully, I think, a lot of good, beautiful things in there. But the reality in the real world, we come upon heterosexual couples who live together sometimes for some years before considering formalizing their relationship and marriage. They'll have children and whatever. And if we want to carry this logic farther, I think we have to say that not everybody is heterosexual, and I know the Pope will not recognize the marriage available to homosexual couples. However, there's nothing to stop a same-sex couple from reading this document and taking from it helpful support, since there's not a lot of support from the official church. There's nothing to say that they cannot read this document as a couple and get support and maybe draw closer to one another and to God from this document. That's my observation.
Okay. I agree with you. I think, and the Holy Father wrote it to all of lay faithful, and to read it and to look at it, and we didn't get into that tonight, but there are regular situations, a lot of irregular situations. Besides divorce and remarriage, the cohabitation, same-sex couples, many different things that are very irregular according to law.
Can I ask what the rule is now since I don't actively participate in marriage prep, a couple's been living together. Some priests used to say for 6 months or so, there is no doubt. You know what I mean? No.
Right. Mhm.
What's the policy? Is there?
There's not a written policy, and just like we were talking before, different priests may have different sort of pastoral policies that they have. My approach has always been, if this couple's coming to regularize the relationship that they have, they're seeking the sacrament of marriage, want to challenge them, and I challenge all the couples that I work with to refrain from sexual activity for marriage. You know, central to the Marriage Act and to the sacrament is first sexual act after marriage, and you know, to look forward to that, to prepare for that, and if they are sexually active, to fast from that until there's celebration of marriage. So whether they're living together or not, I encourage that. Now, I don't, you know, they're adults, and I challenge them, encourage that. Just say, you know, encourage all couples to celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation before receiving the sacrament of marriage. What do you think?
Ted? Todd?
Can I just make one comment? It's just to accentuate some of the things that you've been saying, but going to Father Don's point, one of the really powerful messages in the exhortation is about couples that cohabit for economic reasons. And I think that's really a profound paradigm shift in the document itself, integrating Catholic social teaching and Catholic sexual teaching and realizing the impact that economics have on human relationships and that don't allow people to live out the ideals. So the example it gives is two people that are living together and intend to marry, but they can't economically afford it. And he says we can't judge those as irregular situations by definition, as they're not in grace or in mortal sin. And I think that's a very powerful message.
Yeah. I definitely, and throughout that, he keeps on calling attention back, especially to those cultures that do not support marriage, those cultures that are people that are more subject, especially the poor, to those economic difficulties, to violence, to some of the other things that are very destructive to marriage and to family life.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, again, thank you very much. I want to hand things over to Colleen.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Todd Salzman, who Todd is recording this right now. Todd he holds the Amelia and Emma Graff Professorship, or the chair. So he is the sponsor of this. This recording will be put on our Facebook page whenever it's ready, so you can refer people who weren't able to join us tonight. They can go out and watch this. On April 30th at 7 p.m. we'll have another talk in this series, and it will be Dr. Dan DeLeo talking about Catholic social teaching and the dignity of work. So if you want to be invited to that, give me your email address and I'll certainly include you. But if you've got your calendar out now and you want to write it down, please do. Thank you for coming, for joining us, and please stay and have some refreshments before you leave. Thank you.